Welcome to the EQ Podcast. Hey, welcome to the EQ Podcast, a show focused on equipping ministry leaders within the Calvary Chapel Association in the Pacific Northwest. I'm your host, Zach Lamberson, and with me today is Pastor Steve Winter of Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities and our special guest, Dennis Davenport. How you doing, Dennis?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Steve, how about you?
I'm doing good.
And how do you guys know each other?
Dennis was going to Calvary Chapel Riverside before I did, and pretty early on, he just kind of showed up in my life and kind of took me under his wing. You got more?
I don't have any more. Your memory will be better than mine. I'm 71, you know.
That's awesome. How long you been doing ministry, Dennis?
Well, you know, if you include my home study, since 1975.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So we've got a handful of questions for you today, and we've been really excited about doing this podcast, especially in light of the Jesus Revolution movie and just a lot of the good feedback we've got from people. And just it seems like there's a lot of interest in Jesus right now. And you, Steve, told me that you are actually, there pretty close to the beginning. You're on Greg Laurie's board now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you know Greg pretty well. What did you think? I mean, without... obviously you like Greg. We love Greg. What did you think of the movie?
I love Greg too. I don't just like him.
Yeah.
I thought the movie was well done. You know, they took a little liberty to license, to artistically kind of make things flow a little better. So it's not a documentary, it's a movie, and people need to understand that. But they captured well the heart of what happened there. You know, I mean, it was a blessing.
No, that's great. You again, Steve told me you got saved just right after Greg started his church. About how old was the church? How many people were going when you started going?
You know, I don't know. All I know is I was in 1973 is when I started attending the church. And that was when the movie ended, when Chuck sat there with the keys and gave them to Greg. Okay. That's when I came in. The first meeting in that building was when I came in. That's what, after we left All Saints and went to the new building there. I mean, it was not a new building by any stretch. It was a former church. And then Chuck went down and did all the deals, and then handed Greg the keys. Now, Greg still had to pay that off. It was a loan. So.
Yeah, that was one of the things I heard Greg actually say that was not, accurate in the movie. Chuck was a businessman.
Yeah, he was. He was a good steward of and a wise man when it came to investing money.
So, Dennis, how many people were going to Calvary when it first started? When you first started going there, how many people were there?
I'd say probably 300 to 400 people.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, and Steve, you started going a couple years after that?
Yeah, I went for the first time in August of 1975.
Okay,
and so there was I went to a Sunday evening service. There were probably that building probably held 300 people, something like that, maybe 400.
Especially the way we had them jammed in.
Yeah, and so it was full. It was full at that point. So
were we opening up the windows on the side, the frosted windows, and people sitting on either side when you went?
Yeah, they were doing that on Sunday morning. They didn't do that Sunday night, and so it was everybody inside the building.
Okay.
Yeah, at that point.
So that was the overflow, is they just opened the windows and put people on the outside?
Like literally. They had those windows that kind of hinged up.
Yeah.
And so they'd bring them up, and you'd sit outside on metal chairs.
That's the best overflow ever.
You'd watch. And that's after everybody's sitting on the floor.
Oh, right.
You absolutely couldn't see well at all into the building because those windows were so tall and skinny, but the word was being taught and the worship was going on. So it was awesome.
That's so great. I think our church, modern church, is a little coddled. Like our overflow rooms have real chairs and big speakers and air conditioning and stuff.
Screens.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you got saved. Were you saved at Greg's church, or did you come to Greg's church? You're already a Christian and just start going there.
I was a Christian in word. I believed in God. I did my best to keep the Ten Commandments. Thought like the Pharisees, if you keep them outwardly, you're a pretty good guy. But I didn't know. I knew what not to do. Growing up in the church, I knew what not to do. You know what? I didn't know what to do. And when I went to Harvest for the first time, Calvary Riverside at that time, and I heard the word taught for the first time, man, I heard sermons, but I never heard the word taught verse by verse, and it changed my life. I mean, it's what was missing that I was looking for that really changed my life.
Yeah, that's the amazing testimony. That's what I hear from so many people at that time. It seems like God was working in a lot of areas, but it was like that, just pushing over the hump to kind of get them to where they need to be.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you transition into ministry, and this is kind of where I want to look at this and kind of get your perspective, because you took over a church. You didn't plant a church necessarily. You took over another body. Where was that at?
That was in the high desert of Southern California, where I still reside and still am pastoring.
And what's the church called now?
Calvary Chapel High Desert.
High Desert. That's it's the city. It's called High Desert.
No.
It's actually in Hesperia. The High Desert is like Tri-Cities, sort of. It's got Victorville, Hesperia, Atlanta, and Apple Valley.
Oh, what's that other dink one? What's the town that starts with an F? My brother-in-law was there.
Oh, it doesn't start with an F. It starts with a P.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Phelan. Yeah.
It sounds like an F.
Sounds
though.
like an F, though.
So I'm going to ask you, what was that like, taking over someone else's church? How big was the church when you did it? What was the transition like for you?
Well, it was big in the sense. I mean, it was not big compared to Harvest. I mean, but it was for a church. It was probably, I'd say we had maybe 200 people there when I first went to the church there, and so maybe even 3.
Okay.
So I wasn't looking to take over a church. I was looking to just stay on staff at Harvest for the rest of my life. But God had other plans. And so it was, taking over a church you're always compared to the guy that was there before. You see, you don't have that. Just like Adam and Eve didn't have anybody to compare each other, other two. So she was the most beautiful woman and he was the most handsome man. But when you come into the church and you're the new guy, now the pastor, that was there before you, they go, well, we don't like this new guy. And so there was that to deal with,
How about the elders? How was that transition? Did you know some of the guys, or was it completely different group of guys that...
I kind of knew a couple of the guys and had lost contact because a couple of the guys were down at Harvest, at Calvary Riverside before. And so I kind of remotely knew them, but they had been up here for several years. So I didn't connect with them, like at least knowledge wise the way I knew them before. But I mean, when the elders were there, left in place, I figured, I think if you're taking over a church, just some simple points that I learned. And number one, I mean, it's not your church. You know what I mean? It doesn't belong to me. It is an opportunity that God has given to me, but it's not my church. So, because it's not my church, you have to realize when you take over a church, this church was functioning before you ever got there. And God was blessing and maybe, not as much as he, is going to, hopefully, because you want it to grow and you want to see people get saved and discipled. But I mean, it's something that was already functioning. So you don't want to, I think the mistake that a lot of guys make, especially younger guys, God bless them, when they get the opportunity to take over a church, they immediately go in and change everything. And there's the mistake, because that church is already going and growing, and you need to come in as sort of a servant, like that's what we're called to do, and then get to know this is a body of believers. This is Christ's bride. She needs to be known. You need to spend a little time with her, just listening to her and just doing what you can to minister to the needs that you see presently, and just kind of go slow. I mean, so many times a young guy will come in, he'll throw out the pulpit and throw this thing out and change the lighting and do, and just change the order of service and that kind of a thing. And that's where, you get into trouble, I think. And you not that God still won't work, but you maybe alienate some people that you could have kept. And in fact, I kind of did that. And they came back. Fortunately, they were so kind, but I did that initially, and so that's something where I've learned: when you come into a church, just come in as a servant when you're taking over, and that's what you're called to do. And then slowly, you're not in the motorboat, you're in the Titanic. It takes a little time to turn it around in a different direction. So many guys get in the motorboats and buzz around, and the church, I mean, you blow it up, and just come and serve.
Yeah.
That's great.
You're going to have enough problems in the first place. You don't need to make more.
Because you're adjusting to them and they're adjusting to you. That's just your style of ministry. But don't talk the guy down that was there before you and walk around. We're going to change things. That's where you get yourself in trouble.
Yep.
I think that's super helpful. You're getting older and you're transitioning now into your son-in-law is on staff and he's kind of taking the church over. What's that process look like? I know it's kind of a different scenario. He's not coming in from the outside necessarily. You've raised him up in a sense from the inside, and you're passing on to the next generation. And I know you're encouraging guys, who are getting older to do the same. How do you go about that process?
First of all, it's the most painful thing. One of the most painful processes that there are. You know what? It's sort of like, and certainly I'm not comparing myself in any way to John the Baptist, but when John says he must increase and I must decrease, it's difficult. I mean, I never thought it would be as hard as it is to sit in the front pew on Sunday mornings and listen to somebody else preach when you're called to be the preacher yourself. And you go, oh, that whippersnapper, he shouldn't have done it. I would have said this. And you got to avoid that again at all costs. It's the same attitude. Well, I'm going to change this and we're going to get this church on the ball because that guy wasn't doing it. It's the same kind of a thing, only, you're the guy. And it's hard. I mean, it's weird to attend the church, and he's been teaching on Sunday mornings now for a year. So when it comes time, turn around and meet somebody you haven't met before. It's weird to turn around and shake hands with people, and they don't know you're the pastor. I mean, hi, are you new here? Yeah, this is my first time. and then people, fortunately, somebody will come up and say, hi, pastor, because they've been around for a while, and then they'll go, oh, so you're well, who's the pastor here? Well, I'm the senior only because I'm 71, and then there's the new guy that's coming up, and you know what, just to let him learn and grow. The Lord has spoken to me, because at first I go, well, you need to do this, and you could have done more on this, you could have done more on that, and you know what, the grace of God, just to say, hey, Lord, you do what you want, and he's going to deal with things differently, and that's okay. He's the guy I've called for this time. And so just to let him be him. And then if he asks you for pointers or whatever, then you know what, share with him. And if there's things that are, ongoing that really are kind of not solid as far as connecting or whatever, I may talk to him about those things, but give him a chance to grow, because you know what, here's the deal. The reality is he's way better a preacher than I ever was, especially when I came up, because I mean, first of all, I'm stuck to my notes pretty much, thank God, that there are those that God uses that are stuck to notes. I mean, I'm pretty much, read my notes. If I get off my notes too far, I get on rabbit trails that are not. I haven't thought through. I haven't.
I don't know where this is going.
What am I doing here? And so I just. He's a way better preacher than I was before I came up, because I've listened to some of my messages, and I go, man, I don't even know why people came back. Obviously it was Jesus.
Yeah. I think your first word of advice, that it's not your church. It's still not your church. It's the Lord's church. So you can hand it off as easy as you took it upon yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it wasn't easy to take it upon myself. Taking it off.
So Dennis, have you?
You know what? I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. We're going back and forth, and he'll teach a book, and I'll teach a book, and he'll teach a book on Sunday mornings, and I'll teach a book, and we're doing the same thing on Wednesday nights. And so, I don't know if that's the way to do it. This is all new to me, so I'm certainly not the authority. But to me, it's working so far, and I think the people are. I think we're in a good place now because, as I said, I've been kind of moving that direction for the last couple of years. And if the Lord took me home today, I think the church is ready. Yeah. I mean, they're not going to be scratching their head going, who's going to be the next guy? If anything happened to Dennis, I think the trauma would be way reduced because they've been introduced to the man who's going to take it over.
So have you had any issues with people coming up and going, "Oh, I like you better," and
yeah. And they like them. They don't say to me they like him better, but they say to him they like him.
So have you had any problems with people wanting
in front of me? They don't say we like him better in front of me.
Yeah, that's always nice.
I think to some extent. So
yeah. So have you had any problems with people leaving the church, anything like that?
Yeah. And you know what? You can't let that bother you. I mean, the people, most that have left have been there for 30 years, and I was their pastor. I mean, I've been there. It'll be 39 years in July. So I've been their pastor. There's people around that have been with me all the way from the beginning. And there's a few people that are still there that were here before I came. And so, and people leave. Some of the older people leave, and I'm all right. I don't give them a hard time. A lot of them, they're thinking, well, if we're going to change pastors, let's go ahead and change churches and get, especially as they age, get something that's a little closer to home. I mean, they drive, 12 miles, 10 miles. Some drive from Barstow, which is a 25-minute drive to come to church. And so those people, kind of tend to go, and some have moved out of California. I don't know if you guys know in Washington, but there's an exodus out of California. And in fact, in Washington because they're coming.
Well, they're actually passing through our state to Idaho and Montana.
That's true. Idaho, Texas, Tennessee, Nashville. So.
That's so great. So I got just a few more questions, and we call this a lightning round. So just quick answers. If you had one pastor you want to go to listen to, dead or alive, who's that guy?
Charles
Swindoll. That's great. All right. How about a recent book that you've read that you'd suggest to other pastors that they should be reading this book?
Liberating the Ministry from the Success Syndrome. That's a great book.
Who's it by?
It's by, what's his name? I can't think of his name. The guy that writes all the preaching commentaries. Can't think of his name offhand.
All right, we'll put it in the notes.
It's a great book. Put it out there. Liberating Ministry from the Success Syndrome.
That's great. All right, last one. One piece of advice for someone in full-time ministry. Well, if you had one piece of advice to give them, what is it?
Don't get bitter. There are seasons in ministry. Things ebb and things flow. Be careful you don't get bitter, and don't take things personally. Recognize that you're standing, for the Lord Jesus Christ and his word. And so people aren't going to like it. Some people, like parts of it and they don't like other parts of it. But don't allow people to make you bitter. Just rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice.
That's great. Thanks so much, Dennis. Appreciate you coming on.
God bless you. Great seeing you guys. Love you guys. Love what you're doing up there. Love that church. Great church, Calvary Chapel Tri-Cities. If you haven't been there and you're headed into that area, you got to check it out.
All right. Thanks, Dennis. God bless,
Thanks.
man.
God bless.
The EQ podcast is here as a resource for our listeners. Check us out at eqministry.com. On our website, you'll find a variety of helpful tools, including past ministry conferences and a contact form to seek out help or counsel from seasoned Calvary pastors who want to encourage you in your serving or answer your ministry-related questions. Until next time, God bless.